If you caught last week's live, I'm just going to check and make sure I am live right now. Yes, I am. Look at that. If you caught last week's live, then you know that um, I'm talking about how I saved a 40-year-old company and basically outlining it was really, if I break it down, it was really like there were kind of three areas of focus. So I talked about one of them last week, which was, well, one, two, I kind of mashed together pricing and production. So I talked about that last week. And I just want to go back and just real quick, just kind of go back to that real quick. Um, so, and just a real quick review on just the sitch. so, I was hired as an estimator in a 40-year-old mason restoration business. That business was doing 1.5 million, but struggling. And, um, you know, I, through trial and a ton of error in my first 2 years, essentially figured out how to turn it around. And then we made quite a bit of money for my last 4 years. So, um, so I want to share those things because, you know, one of the things that I learned uh, when I learned several years ago, and this is going to sound naive, but I just assumed, um, I made the ignorant young man's assumption that, everybody's thinks like I do. And so I always think like, we've got to make this better. We've got to make this better. I'm always looking for ways to optimize stuff. I didn't realize that other people didn't do that. Um, and so that's why I was so shocked to get hired by this company and then realize like they're just barely keeping this thing together. So, so the model, so I'm going to share my screen real quick because I shared this last week. And so one of the things that I learned, um, in actually within my first year, I went to Tony Robbins Business Mastery. This is from the workbook. There's the Robbins Research International there. So this is from the workbook at Business Mastery. And so one of the things and I did not understand this when I learned it back in early 2017. So a business just has a life cycle, just like we do, right? So there's birth, infancy, toddler, teenager, young adult, uh, zone of maximum maturity, which is sort of like midlife, mid 30s to say mid 40s, early 50s. Midlife evaluation, aging, institutionalization. It gets a little dark, and then death. Okay, so so I learned about this, and I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, where's the business I'm in? And the business I was in, the Mason restoration business, was here in Toddler. So, and they're in Toddler. So, and it was in Toddler, even though it was, like 39 years old at the time. So that was really informative because it made a lot of sense, right? Because, for one, um, we were chasing payroll. I mean, constantly chasing customer payments, constantly every 2 weeks, every payroll week, like, was an absolute nightmare. I mean, it sucked. And again, this is a 40-year-old company. Um, and it just was like, as someone who had enough experience in business to know that, like, this survival thing, this wasn't going to work, like we can't grow if we can't, if we're fighting to make payroll every other week. So, so, so I kind of took this frame, and so I thought, well, what's killing us the most? And this is what I talked about last week. What was killing us the most um, was our pricing was just a mess. I mean, there was no organization. every time I'd want to price something, I'd have to call, to get we didn't have a centralized way of keeping track of chemical prices and, brick and, different kinds of mortars, different kinds of sands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have it. There was no database. There was no list. I mean, it was just all in here. I mean, maybe someone had something written down, but there was nothing that I could get my hands on. So I tackled pricing. And here's the other part about that, and again, this is also, I think this is also true for, and again, at least I've seen with, again, companies that are, more mature, like even companies that are growing, like that are in like this, this teenager stage here, like oftentimes like we don't really organize and systematize how we're pricing stuff, especially as contractors, like, sometimes we see an opportunity to make more money. And so we bid something high, right. So we lack a little bit of consistency. And that was a situation with the owner and estimator when I joined the masonry restoration business. It was just, they would slash their throats like early part of the season to get these contracts, which invariably would be either break even or would actually cost us money or would be, very little profit. And then when we were busy, does this sound familiar to anybody? When we were busy, the owner was always pushing, was doing it himself and was pushing me to like tack more on. And that model didn't work. It didn't work at all. In fact, I mean, that business had essentially, I mean, it wasn't really breaking even. It had lost about $250,000 over the course of the previous 10 years. So they basically had breaking even, but actually had lost money on a net basis. And that was reflected in the company's, financials and in the company's state. So, starting with pricing and starting with even, even if it's just to optimize it, makes a lot of sense, right? And that's something that so when I left the business, when I left last year, we were here. So we had kind of come through this growth phase and we're sort of like making a lot of these kinds of decisions where we were, thinking about the future. I was thinking about, staff and like looking for some talent and, a lot of things to like sort of like level out this crazy growth we went through for 4 years. So even even here being in this phase, being like kind of like getting to this sort of like, this kind of like prime position, which is essentially, for quick context. So this zone of maximum maturity this is where every business wants to be. Like this is where every one of us wants to be, because as the owner, you have people running your business. Actually, this is very much, if we looked at Jay's roofing business, Jay Carter Roofing in Toronto, you'll see these kinds of things, right? Reaping the rewards. Jay spends very little time in his roofing business. His employees run it, and he essentially gets to collect a 5-figure check every month. Like he just gets like a dividend from his business, which is pretty awesome. Developing a system for managing the business that allows to consistently meet the needs of the community and serve yourself. So essentially, where the business is like kind of like a machine, right? Where it's just, it's going out, it's getting sales, it's getting new customers, it's then producing that work, and then the jobs are getting completed, and the money's paid, and then there's a lot more left over. It's very profitable. So essentially, to boil it down, right here in the zone of maximum maturity, this is really where we, Jay and I and our team, want to help contractors that are in this group and that have already hired us to get to here. Like this is the dream, because essentially you have a machine that's bringing in leads, and then a machine that's converting those leads into jobs, and then a machine that produces those jobs optimally to make money, and then collects them, and then a machine that collects the money, and then a machine that pays employees out a bonus or some sort of profit share, which Jay does, which I was doing, which by the way is one of the best things I ever did was build a profit sharing program, and then books the profit to the owner, right? So this is really like, this is the dream. And so again, where I was, I was here early in this young adult phase when I left the Mason restoration business. And my point is that we were still working on, I was still optimizing the pricing models. Okay. Still working on the pricing, but we're not going to talk about that because I spent like 45, maybe an hour last week talking about pricing. So I'm not going to get into that, but the reason why the reason why I tackled that first is that like everything, particularly as a contractor, everything comes like what's the budget for the dollar budget, the time budget, the equipment budget, the materials budget, the labor, how many men, all that comes from your price. So if you get the price wrong in terms of how many men, or obviously how many hours, how many days, or what the mark is, or get the material pricing wrong or the equipment pricing, like all that stuff makes it hard. So, um, so that's really foundational. And, the thing that I use when I tackled pricing, I figured out how much we could charge broadly, right? Like what we needed to be and how much we could charge, for what we were doing. And then I pushed that up. So we started with a certain price, but by the time we left, I had raised our prices like 300%. So, and we earned that. I mean, we crushed. I mean, we had an incredible system. The work was incredible. I mean, it was nobody, I mean, literally nobody's work looked better than ours. And I mean, I'm not just saying that because I was running the business. I believe it because I looked at it and I know what other people do. And I was so proud of the work we did. So I charged as much as we possibly could, but we had to start with figure out how much we could charge for what we were doing. And then as we improved our production, improved the business, I charged more. Okay. So pricing is important. What we're going to talk about today is target customer. And so once you figure out like what you can charge, then you want to figure out, we want to figure out who we should be talking to, right? Because I had the experience of, let me take this off. So, and I'm sure again, this is not unique to me, but I learned the hard way about target customers, like who our customers should be and who they shouldn't be. So, being a sub to multiple GCs that were disorganized, cash poor, uh, we would get stuck doing the work for free, getting paid late, and sometimes not at all. So, after working for owners, general contractors, and architects that, did not have their stuff together for one reason or another, that, I mean, again, we lost almost $900,000 over 2 years, which we did not have to lose. The business was like, the business was teetering when I came in. Then we lost another 900 grand. Things got hard. So, so, um, I knew that we had to, like, coming out of the second year of losses, I knew like if we don't make some serious, like big changes to the kind of work we're doing, we're dead. Like this business is out of business and, it won't survive another year. And that was where things were in the early 2000s. So just to give some context here, in early 2019, we had no money. I went without pay for, I want to say 5 months. So my partner and I, we just lived on our savings. Our estimator, essentially our other estimator, went to, I don't remember what he was doing. He was like logging his hours, and so he basically reduced his pay ostensibly by like 80%. He was a salaried person that basically just would log his hours and got paid these hourly during that period of time. While we were, so we're out bidding, right? And this is in the winter of 2019, the early part of 2019. So I'm not getting paid while all this is going on, and we're going out to bid work to try to build our spring calendar because we have nothing for spring for 19. Um, I I lost my train of thought. It'll come back. So while all this is happening, the IRS sends a certified letter saying you owe us, I think it was like 85 or $90,000. So we need that money in 30 days. And I mean, we can't even afford to pay people. So, you know, so I went and called all the loan sharky third party, folks that would take my call to find that money. And sorry, no, it wasn't 85. Sorry, that's not wrong. It was 150,000. That's what it was. It wasn't 85,000. It was 150,000. And so I went out and um found like 4 or 5 lenders. Again, this is like we're talking about like 40% a year, like basically again like legal loan sharking. And I found them that would do the deal. So the owner went and met with the IRS, and the deal they cut was that they would, if we could pay half of it in a lump sum, we could term out the other half over like, I think it was 2 years, maybe a year, 2 years. I don't remember. So that sounded like a pretty good deal because I didn't think we could get $150,000 from these, these high interest third parties. And that it ended up that we couldn't. So anyway, so I go and I work like 3 deals and brought 3 deals to close, knowing that at least one of these people was going to try to screw me with like drop in like a, like a clause or something, or like a whatever, like lying with the interest. I mean, again, the rules are very, I mean, if anyone out there has worked with these folks, these third party lenders, it's the Wild West. There's really no rules. So I went in prepared. I worked 3 deals. I did a deal with one of them, and then obviously didn't do the other 2, and we met it. So suffice to say, it was a hard time. But here's what was great about that early part of 2019, because coming out of 18, I had looked at like what was working and what wasn't working. But like I looked at, because at that point I had 2.5 years worth of larger projects. We had done a hospital, we had done this big what was an old mansion that was now like an administration building for a local college. And we had done schools, churches, private jobs, public jobs. So I had all of this, and I just looked at the numbers for all of these jobs and started looking at the various factors, right? Looked at the ones that we did really well, looked at the ones that we did really poorly, and saw that, and again, this is not going to surprise anybody, but the stuff that we did poorly was far away. So it was far away from our, warehouse, our shop. And for us, it was over 2 hours from our shop. So, so I saw that like distance was really costing us. Also public jobs, because again, as an open shop, which is, non-union open shop, we had a lower wage rate because we didn't have all the fringe and all those requirements of the unions. So when we would do a public job, it was like we had to pay like we were a union shop, or nearly, pretty close to. And our overhead was so high. It was like, I mean, back then it was like $1.2 million or something, I want to say. It was ridiculous. Maybe 3. It was between like $1 million and $1.4 million. So we could not afford all that labor. And then it was also, public jobs were murder on like administration, because you had to do certified payrolls every week. Some of you, you're nodding your heads like, oh yeah, like certified payroll. So the bookkeeper was slammed, and it was like cash was tight. And then most of those jobs were like, some of them were net 60, and some of them were even like net 90. And we could not wait that long. But you don't get to negotiate those terms when they're written into a public job like that. And the only way you're going to get better pay terms is if you get, if the GC or the owner and architect are are kind or like you, but you can't go into a job hoping to like negotiate something that's not in writing, because ultimately they can just say no. So anyway, the point is like, so it's public jobs, jobs at distance, and like jobs that were like, where the scope of work was more complex. Like I was looking at this train station in late 18 and early 19, and it was just, there was all this, types of stone we didn't typically do, so we didn't really know where to source it from. And the more I looked at this scope, and then the scope of work, and then I met the architect for that job, and he was like super anal retentive, and I was like, there's no way we can make money. This guy, and it was like one of those things that was written in the spec book where we had to use hand tools. We couldn't use grinders to grind out the mortar joints. I'm thinking, first of all, there's no way that we're using hand tools. Like I can't charge enough to even get close to that. Secondly, like, I'm setting myself up for a fight with this guy when he comes on the job site, and all of our grinders are going, right? So anyway, so I saw this pattern that like it was essentially complexity was the enemy of our profitability. So when it came to our customers, we had to get, like, it was too, like, it was complex because we would get all of these different, get emails, we get people calling the office, people calling me, people calling the owner, people calling the other estimator. And so all these people are fielding calls and leads are coming in. It was a mess. And that made it complicated. So, the other estimator would go look at this stupid job, right? That I would never have taken, right? I would never have looked at that, but I didn't get it. But because I didn't hear about it, he's going out basically just, chasing his tail on some ridiculous job. It's not even a job, right? So I saw this pattern. So I'd worked with the owner to kind of like say, okay, like so first of all, when it came to our customer, like we had to make this more simple, right? So public customers, I said, we can't do public anymore because public is killing us. And, we have to charge, we literally have to like mark ourselves up 2 times what we normally mark up. So, and they're all low bid. So we're basically just spinning our wheels, because in order for us to get anywhere close to what we're making in these private jobs, we have to double essentially our mark, which we were already marking everything 100%. So like, there's no way we can compete on low bid for these jobs. So it's basically just, we're basically just going out and just burning time. So I convinced him of that. And, and so essentially what we, so let me back up here. So essentially what I did was I kind of started building like a customer blacklist, which again, it wasn't, I mean, there were specific customers on there. Okay. But it wasn't to like blacklist individual customers or GCs or architects or whatever. But it was really more about like who, how they did business and so on. So this is what I mean. So, so our blacklist was more like, okay, I'm not working with general contractors that don't have their shit together, right? Because if they don't have their shit together, that's going to affect, what we can do on the job site, where we can work, our productivity, our completions, and ultimately, how much, when we get this job done, which is very important, and how much money we make, which is, I mean, both are equally important, right? Because you got a schedule, you got the next job behind it, right? So, so I thought, so the first thing on the blacklist was no more disorganized, people, right? No more, whether it's a owner, an owner that isn't have the cash, or a general contractor, or an architect, right? Because we would get the invites from architects and engineers, individual owners that owned buildings or companies, and then obviously from generals. So the first rule was like they need to be well capitalized, and then the next thing was they also, the project itself needs to pass the mustard. So like, we're not bidding projects that aren't projects anymore, like as a, goodwill gesture, because that eats up time, right? And while I'm bidding this job, it's not a really good job. This other thing over here, I can't get to. And then the other guy wins it because he gets there faster because it's private. So it's not like we're on this bidding calendar. It's like he gets the thing there first and he gets the job. So we just made this long list of stuff that we had to say no to. So public jobs, no, like public, no, too complicated, right? Private or public. So if it was private, but it was the counterparty, the architect, engineer, owner, whatever, they weren't well run, weren't well capitalized, like didn't communicate well, even in the early stages. No, if it wasn't a job, if it wasn't really a job, I can't bid that. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not your guy. I'm not the guy that's going to go out and burn 15 to 20 hours just so you have an idea of what's going to cost. And so, I mean, I had a solution where I could tell them, okay, it's 20 bucks a foot, 30 bucks a foot, $8 a lineal foot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what I think you have in your building. And I could do that in about, I don't know. I could probably do that. And today I could do it in 30 minutes. Back then I could do it in a couple of hours as a goodwill gesture if it was someone I wanted to work with in the future. So again, made this blacklist of like all these traits that were like hard nosed, like they're not run well. No, they don't seem to be capitalized, have cash flow. No. Also, I started pulling the credit. So when someone would reach out to us, whether it was me directly or through the office or through any one of our employees, we would run a credit check. So I would have our attorney would pull a LexisNexis, which is a very detailed credit check, and also shows like lawsuits and things like that. And that helped me to not bid to a handful of folks, right? Because I was like, these guys have like multiple open lawsuits or have had a lot of lawsuits. Like that's, like this is not someone I don't want to be the next person on their LexisNexis report that's in a lawsuit with them. So, I was able to make some very informed decisions on not working with folks. And, in 2018, and here's where it kind of comes down to like, to get like practically, and like where we're making those decisions converged with the business, and where we basically saved ourselves a ton of heartache. So there were two jobs that I had been, one, I actually helped develop the scope of work. It was a friend of mine that was one of the most senior superintendents for a very large Pittsburgh-based general contractor, and they had a private historical job that was, I think it was 12 or 15 million in scope to them. So it was going to be like $1 million, somewhere around $1 million job for us. So I was interested in that. And I knew him. I knew how he ran work. And so I was kind of excited about that, because now I'm going to work with someone that I know really well. He's actually a really good friend of mine. So I go out and develop the scope of work and get paid to do it. So I actually, got paid, we got, I don't know, maybe we got paid $10,000 to go out and help them develop the masonry restoration scope of work. Maybe it was less, I don't know. So I was excited about this, but then they like put out the spec book and I was not excited anymore. So in the spring of 2019, I did all the numbers. Their budget was, I think it was like $1 million. It was between 800 and $1 million, or maybe they said it was 500,000, but he told me they would spend up to $1 million. So it was like between 500,000 and $1 million. And I built the whole project, and it was like 2.6 million. What we would need to charge to get, anywhere close. And that same architect that was on that was on another job that I had passed on. And I thought to myself, I got to talk the owner out of this, because he's going to want to do this job and we can't do this job. So I did. I called him. I said, we have to bow out of this. We have to decline to even bid the job. I mean, I've worked up the numbers, but there's no point in bidding this, because their budget I think it was 800, and we're at 2 point. There's no way. I mean, we're so far apart. It doesn't even make sense to give him a number, and because it's time, right? We're out there bidding, trying to build our spring schedule. I can't spend the time. So he reluctantly agreed. And I sent an email to the counterparty saying, hey, thanks so much for letting us participate in this project. It doesn't look like we're going to, bid the job, but, best of luck to you, blah, 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 blah. And that turned out to be very much the right decision. There was another job, same spring, was far less money that I'd actually bid to. It was a historical restoration, same thing, private though. And so, it was a building that was, not a big building, like a small mid-rise, had a cool history, and it changed. The general contractor changed because the one general contractor walked away because their price was too high for the owner. And again, so I pulled the credit for the new general contractor, and then I went on site to meet the superintendent and took one of our people along with me. And from talking with the superintendent, I realized so their report was okay. It wasn't bad. But the fact that the first general had to basically pass the job off, and the things that were coming back were budget. I knew, like I had the state the building was in, and their lack of willingness, they're being so what's the word I'm looking for? The fact that the budget was like they were asking me to cut things out or lower the price, and I was like, well, I can't. I can't do either of those, and do anywhere this was already a reduced scope of work, and so I was like, that we got to walk from that. So we walked away from that, and here's what happened. So it's not anyone hearing this is hearing me say I walked away from two, and so that was one job was again probably 800,000. The other one was 100-ish, 115, 120. I don't know. So, several $100,000 worth of work. Had we taken those jobs, the smaller one was a nightmare. They ended up having to pull out, redo a bunch of the structural steel. I mean, it would have, the schedule on that would have been just it would have been toast. The bigger one was a absolute nightmare. In fact, it's my good friend that was the superintendent on it. According to him, it's one of the worst jobs he's ever ran from a budget standpoint for his company, where I think they ate $2 or $3 million, which is a lot, which is a lot to eat. So I think they had bid the job at 10 or 12, and it came in around 15 that they came out of pocket to finish. So, I mean, it was what you would expect on a job like that. So it was, subs not getting paid, subs not getting paid on time. I mean, it was just change orders getting tied up in the bureaucratic, mess of approvals and non-approvals, and it was just a nightmare. For us, though, we ended up bidding and winning. Let me think about this. 3 historical jobs that were also private, and over the next few months, this is early 19, we ended up getting 3 or 4 nice, between $250 and $600,000, real, for us, that's kind of a sweet spot. So we would get in there, just crush, cut everything out, get it back in. We could just slam those out. And we ran, it was high 60s. So high 60% gross profits on those jobs. And I mean, that was really what turned the company around, was saying no to those 2 jobs that would have put us out of business. Had I not stood up and said, we can't do this, that big one, that would have put the company out of business. He would have had, the owner would have had no choice but to, he wouldn't have been able to pay anyone, it would have been the end. So, that was those two decisions were unbelievably important decisions. And then, because again, you think about the swing. So from being being insolvent, really being functionally insolvent, where he wouldn't have been able to pay people, including me and a lot of other folks, to like that year we made like $800,000 in net profit. And we could have made more, but it was the first year of kind of turning things around. So, the second part of that was the second part. So we fixed the pricing and then pricing and production. And then we turned and we figured out who our target customer wasn't, and then who they were. So here's what I'm going to go back to this. So here's something so what I did is I developed all of these long lists, our customer blacklist of who we weren't going to do business with. So once I had that long list, it was like, okay, so we're not so no public jobs, and no public jobs because one, there's the administration, the labor costs, and the low bid are all non-starters for us, right? We need to be able to actually increase our prices. So, okay, so I basically then was like, okay, well then really our target is not just private, but also, historical, like conventional and historical commercial. That's really where we were, like, we knew, like, our men knew the historical standards. And so we executed those really well. We had and this is credit to the owner. Owner had a high, like, attention to detail, eye for detail, and he had instilled that in the staff. And so, like, our men and women, our men in the field, like, they had an eye for, like, how to cut out, joints on buildings that were old, 100, 150, 200 years old. So, so we had this skill, this sort of, like, we had this specialty. And so it wasn't just private jobs, like private traditional commercial, but also historical. So that's how we kind of developed what you're looking at here, which is, these were our dream buyer avatars, or, like, target buyers, and I gave them personalities: Mike, the general contractor, Jeff, the architect. And I shared this with our teams, right? Susan, the architect, Eric, the owner. So, we knew who to look for because we had this, right? So then when leads would come in, I wouldn't ever have to get a call or a text. My people on the front lines, my admin or other people, or junior admins, like, they knew this isn't a job, right? If it came in, it was public, or, came in and it was someone we didn't know or whatever, they knew that that's not, like, we're not looking at that. And actually, something I learned from Jay, because he and I were working together for a couple of years. When I was in my CEO role, Jay was my executive coach. So we worked together, like, literally every week for, I don't know, a year and a half or more. So, so one of the things I learned from him, from his business, was that, they were turning away like 50% of the leads. And I was like, oh yeah, I can see that. Right. And so I started talking to my team about that. Like, look, this is our target customer. This is it, right? This is what they look like. This is who they are. And if it's not that, and then we also had parameters for the jobs, right? Same thing. So we're not doing any public jobs, and we're not doing jobs that are, if it's not in our scope of work, we're not doing it, because we're not going to do it well. And we're potentially missing out on a job that is within our core competency that we're good at doing. Right. So it was figuring out. So again, my method of doing it, and this is, I think, the easiest way, is to figure out what's not working, right? Because those examples are all around, whether you pull a job cost report or a P&L or whatever. It was easy for me to get a long list of what didn't work, and then to start putting together the similarities of those jobs, and then did the same thing for the jobs that did work. And that's how I kind of arrived at, okay, the things that didn't work, those were that went on my blacklist. The things that did work went on my like go list, and that's where I developed the Dream Buyer avatars. And so, when I left the business last year, it was, it was easy to it was very easy, and there was a lot of like, and everyone on the front office team, and even some of my top people in the field, like they knew this is not, this is, they would tell me, I don't think this is a good lead, or I don't think this is a job we want to go after, and they would just let me know about it, right? And I would confirm that most of the time. Yeah, we're not interested in that. So it's, again, the pattern that I use is I tackled pricing and production first. Then I tackled the target customer, right? Who the customer, our customer profile. And that was huge, because then I had to train the owner too, because he would call me with this, like a public job. I'd be like, no, dude, we can't do that. We know where that road leads. Let's, like, why tempt fate? This one's not going to be different, right? Because again, none of those public jobs could we make even close to what we were making on the private work. So that was, that was the next thing that I was able to like go after and tackle. And, by being really specific about who we wanted to work with, right? It was easy for my team because they knew, right? So we all knew this is like, these are the people that we make money with. These are the people we don't. We don't even consider that. We don't get shiny object or get greedy. Like, this is who we want to work with. And like, that was critical, because then we built this roster of target customers, because we knew who we wanted to, like, when these leads would come in, we could go after them with even more energy, because we weren't like in the weeds doing all this other stuff, doing bids and quotes and building projects for people that we knew weren't going to be profitable for the business, weren't going to be good for the business, right? Good for the business's health. So knowing our dream buyer was incredibly informative, and we closed more business. It was easier to get contracts because we were a better fit for each other, right? They were a better fit for us, and we were a better fit for them, because we weren't, I wasn't stressing about our labor costs or, about these. I mean, these public jobs, again, for anyone who's done them, what this is like. There's a ridiculous hierarchy. And I mean, I'm all about respecting the contractor hierarchy. So I would, when I was a second tier sub, I would go to the first tier and I would get approvals, and, I wouldn't go over their head. I wouldn't go to the architect or go to the general, or when I was working for, a certain owner, I would go to the, I followed the hierarchy, but, we made a lot, like, it was easier to do business by working with our target customers, a lot easier, right? Because and a lot of them, we had even similar values. I don't know if it was luck or what, but I mean, I left there with multiple very healthy, high functioning working relationships, and where both the general and us, where we had both made a lot of money. So, so there were a lot of mutual wins as well. So anyway, that knowing our dream customer, knowing our target customer, that was massive clarity, and it cleared a lot of confusion up, not just only for me, because I was probably 60%. I was probably 60% of our business in the last 4 years, but it was also for the rest of the team. So again, the pattern was pricing and production, and then target customer. And next week we're going to talk about the third one, which is like people and culture. That was the third kind of big thing, and also really important, like really important. So, and that was a lot of fun for me. So if you've been here, thanks for hanging out with me. I've seen some folks pop on and off while I've been going here. So thanks for hanging out for a few minutes. I'm here every Monday at 12 noon, trying to catch folks maybe on their lunches or taking a break. And then Jay and I go live every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So again, I'm live Mondays at 12 Eastern. Jay and I go live Fridays at 3 Eastern, talking about similar things, but, my outcome for being here on Mondays, is to share some real specific things that I, again, just from having friends that are contractors and being around this business for about 7 years, I know the things that I'm talking about I know what folks are struggling with. So anyway, thanks for hanging out with me. I'm back next week, 12 o'clock. Jay and I are live Fridays at